I am proud to be considering one of my highest priorities as chairman today, the Water Resources and Development Act. When I first became chairman, it had been several years since we were able to pass it, and my desire was to get back to regular order, and regular order is doing a water resources bill each Congress, and we seem to be back on track doing that. I want to thank all the members of the committee and all the staff for their hard work and their desire to work together on this important infrastructure reform bill. This bill, as the staff director Jeff Bowman has called it, the pamphlet word of bill, because if those of you that were here at the last Congress, it was a lot thicker and I think a lot more difficult as we waded through it, but we were able to do it. So again, this is a testament to both sides working together. And this bill does strengthen our infrastructure so that we can remain competitive. It's about economic growth and jobs. Top priority of the bill is fiscal responsibility and, as I said, the reestablishment of a 2-year reauthorization cycle. This bill deauthorizes $5 billion of old projects. Deauthorizes $5 billion of old projects that were authorized prior to the current law and fully offsets new authorizations. In addition, this bill offsets new authorizations to prevent further, it sunsets new authorizations to prevent further project backlogs. WRDA strengthens oversight, transparency, and accountability and maintains Congress's constitutional authority to ensure the nation has an effective infrastructure system. WRDA has no earmarks. Chairman? But still maintains strong congressional oversight and ensures that we don't simply hand over our authority to the executive branch, which in my opinion, we've been doing for far too long in this town, is Congress giving our authority to the executive branch. These are all important, necessary reforms, but at the heart, WRDA ensures that we don't lose sight of the importance of strong infrastructure. This bill supports the nation's water transportation network, keeps America competitive, provides foundation for job growth, and fosters a more robust economy. I ask all the members of the committee to join me in supporting this bill, and I now recognize the subcommittee chairman Gibbs to explain the bill.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, H.R. 5303, the Water Resources and Reform and Development Act of 2016, builds upon the success of WRDA of 2014, one of the most policy and reform-focused pieces of legislation related to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. H.R. 5303 is a bipartisan bill that was developed by working across the aisle to achieve a common goal of investing in America's future. H.R. 5303 contains no earmarks and strengthens our water transportation networks to promote competitiveness, prosperity, and economic growth. By requiring the Army Corps to demonstrate how they prioritize projects, this bill increases transparency and accountability. It also establishes multiple pilot programs to improve infrastructure and consider opportunities for beneficial reuse of dredge material. It simplifies the permit application process by encouraging the use of e-commerce. This bill is fiscally responsible by fully offsetting new project authorizations with deauthorizations of old, inactive projects. This bill continues the path forward of enacting a WRDA bill every 2 years without conceding any congressional authority to the executive branch. This committee held numerous public roundtables and official hearings in developing this legislation. We have heard from the public, industry, stakeholders, and from our colleagues here in Congress while developing this legislation and have incorporated their ideas into H.R. 5303. I appreciate Chairman Schuster, Ranking Member DeFazio, and Ms. Napolitano's bipartisan work to address a vital need for America, and I urge all members to support this piece of legislation. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize Ranking Member DeFazio for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Corps has, in aggregate, about a $40 billion critical infrastructure backlog. That would include locks, dams, jetties, et cetera. And we're about $6 billion in deficit on harbor maintenance. So this bill will go a long way toward addressing at least part of the problem, which is harbor maintenance. Now, we spend a lot of time here fighting over where and how we might find the money to fund critical projects. Yesterday, we were talking about transit. Obviously, in the surface bill, it was highways and transit and more. In this case, we actually have a revenue source. The fact is that every year that revenue source brings in substantially more money than is spent as the harbor maintenance backlog grows, because the money is only supposed to be spent on harbor maintenance. However, it is appropriated elsewhere. And, you know, I started actually working on this issue with the former chairman, Bud Schuster, back in '96. And finally, in this bill, we will come to fruition. By 2027, we will move the entire harbor maintenance trust fund and the annual cash flow off budget. And it will then be available to be spent for the only purpose for which it is legally authorized, as opposed to wherever else it goes into the maw of the federal government, or so-called sometimes deficit reduction today. So I think that's a tremendous step forward. We clarified something. We often seem as that we have to clarify things with the Corps and the trolls at OMB. We put a 10% figure in the last WRDA bill as a set-aside for small and emerging harbors. They tried to interpret that as a cap and not a floor. We make it very clear in this bill, A, we make it permanent, and B, we make it explicit that it's a floor, not a cap. Floor, not a cap, if you're listening down there at the Corps of Engineers or at OMB. It also has language in the bill which I think is very critical, to have a comprehensive federal assessment of all our breakwaters and jetties. We really, anecdotally, many of us who represent coastal areas or inland ports can talk about the needs we know of, but there is no real comprehensive assessment out there. So we need that. Many of these are in very poor condition and failing, and we need to know what the magnitude of that problem is. We've created sort of a workaround for the ridiculous ban on earmarks. For the life of me, I still don't understand why people would prefer to let unappointed federal officials, particularly this administration, decide where money is spent, as opposed to elected members of Congress who know their needs better than others. Unfortunately, that is currently the policy of the majority party. So we have sort of a workaround in this bill. The Corps didn't do so well in the first iteration. They're doing better now. And we will continue with this lame workaround until we get real and go back to allowing earmarks that have been thoroughly, publicly vetted and tested, preferably through a public process and hearings, not inserted in the dark of night, which caused the last controversy. But for now, this is the best we can do. So I strongly recommend this bill to my colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now recognize Ranking Member Napolitano for a statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for remaining steadfast in your commitment to introduce and mark up 5303. I'd like to thank Chairman Gibbs, thank you, Ranking Member DeFazio for their work on this legislation, and of course our respective staff. It's encouraging to see our committee return to working on this legislation every 2 years. As with all water resources legislation, there are several important pieces to note. First, this bill includes 29 Army Corps of Engineers feasibility studies for projects to study water resources projects across the country for a diverse array of purposes, including flood damage reduction, ecosystem restoration, hurricane and storm damage reduction, and navigation. Secondly, 5303 recognizes and authorizes the 28 Corps Chiefs reports pending before Congress. These Chiefs reports include several of great importance to my home state, including the Los Angeles River Ecosystem Restoration Project, the West Sacramento Flood and Risk Management Project, the American River and Common Features Flood Risk Management, and the San Diego County Hurricane and Storm Damage Risk Reduction. This bill also presents us with the opportunity of how to evaluate the new project process as it was developed. That process created by Section 7001 of WRDA 2014 has not gone smoothly. When the first annual report was sent to Congress in 2015, almost every member of this committee agreed that the product was less than acceptable. However, in 2016, it appeared that the Corps heeded our advice and made changes to the process, and as a result, more projects became eligible for inclusion in WRDA. I'm still concerned that the process we created is not working as intended. In fact, it is evident that the course could use more outreach to public to ensure greater public engagement and in the project development process. Additionally, I am pleased to see the inclusion of several provisions that will assist communities experiencing drought and water supply shortages. These provisions include promote non-federal efforts to remove sediment behind core dams and increase water supply, authorize the Secretary of Army to evaluate and implement water supply conservation measures at projects owned or managed by the Corps in the states with drought emergencies, and encourage the Corps to share the data that the Corps collects on operations and maintenance of its facilities to improve coordination with local stakeholders, allow environmental infrastructure and water supply projects to be eligible for the 7001 process, create a pilot program to encourage the beneficial use of dredge material for shoreline restoration and environmental use. I am confident that these provisions, if enacted, will provide drought-stricken regions like mine with tools necessary to increase water supply and water conservation measures, and be better prepared for future storm events to capture and reuse that water that would have otherwise been lost. I want to thank my constituent agencies, the water agencies that have had their input throughout the process, including Upper San Gabriel River Valley Municipal Water District, Three Valleys Municipal Water District, San Gabriel Valley Water Municipal Water District, San Gabriel Valley Water Master, and the Los Angeles County Department of Public Works, and my local Corps leadership, Brigadier General Toy, Colonel Gibbs, and Dave Van Dorp. Mr. Chairman, I thank you, and I look forward to working with you as we move forward on this bill. Yield back.
I thank the gentlelady, thank her for the work on this bill, as I do thank Mr. Gibbs and Mr. DeFazio for all working so hard to put this together. With that, do any other members wish to be heard? Seeing none, we will move on. Excuse me? Oh, Ms. Hahn, yes. Gentlelady from California.
Okay, thank you, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really did want to speak in support of this bill, and I know we're trying to move this along quickly, but I am so happy about this bill, and as a representative of the nation's busiest port complex and the co-founder of our Port Caucus here in Congress, one of the things I've been fighting for since I came to Congress 5 years ago was to take the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund off budget in order to ensure the money that is collected at our ports for our ports actually goes back to our ports. When I started, only about 50% of the funds collected were being used for the operation and maintenance of our ports. The rest were being used as a budget gimmickry. Shippers have been paying billions of dollars of it since 1986, and I fully support the provision in this bill that will finally deliver what they've been paying for all these years by taking the HMT fund off budget. With the Panama Canal expansion set to open next month, it's more important than ever that our ports have the funding they need to prepare for the future and stay globally competitive. It's been quite a journey to get to this point. In 2014, after months of work and negotiations, we passed a word of bill that established annual spending targets that lead to the full use of HMT revenues by 2025. However, less than 2 months after word of 2014 was passed, we had a rude awakening when the Appropriation Committee's water bill fell short of the established target by more than $57 million. That's when I rushed along with Representative Huizenga and offered a floor amendment that brought the funding back in line with those targets that we had set in the water bill. Thankfully, that amendment was passed with overwhelming support, which made me realize that all of us here in Congress understand why this is important. And since then, I, with the support of over 100 members on the Port Caucus, have been working with our appropriators to make sure we continue hitting those targets. However, all of this unnecessary struggle could have been remedied by simply taking the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund off budget. And I love that we've referenced your father, Chairman Schuster, because it was Bud who first started those conversations in 1999 when he introduced a bill that did just that. And I really want to thank you, Chairman Schuster, Ranking Member DeFazio, and the full committee for finally addressing that issue in this bill. This, by the way, my colleagues, will impact every port and every harbor in our nation, big or small, recreational or commercial, West Coast, East Coast, Gulf Coast, or the Great Lakes. This is an incredible victory for our ports, but it's also an incredible victory for jobs that will create economic opportunities for decades to come. So I encourage everybody to support this, and thank you, Chairman Schuster, for allowing me to speak on this great bill. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Any other members wish to be heard?
Yeah.
Seeing none, we will now consider the bill for amendment.